I've been following Elon Musk for many years, and he just said something so shocking this week about Mars that I never saw it coming, and I'm stunned and I don't know what to do with it. Let's talk about what did Elon Musk say? What is going on with SpaceX and the Mars mission? Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so we're going to dive into what he said, but right up at the top here, he said, hopefully humanity will reach Mars in 20 years. Now, this is something he tweeted in 2023, in February of 2023, that would say he's expecting humanity to reach Mars sometime before 2043. That is a dramatically pessimistic statement by Elon Musk. I'm going to go through what I think the timeline has been for how we're going to get to Mars, when we're going to get to Mars, when humanity will reach Mars. And then we're going to dive into the specifics and what's really going on here.
It's a hellhole. Mars is a very, very different. I think the idea that this is going to happen in the next, 10, 20 years seems to me very optimistic. Not that it's insurmountable, but the challenges are extreme to survive on a planet like Mars, which is, like a dry, frozen desert.
The timeline for Mars starts with Starship. Tesla is building the Starship platform. They are getting ready to do an orbital test launch, and Elon has said they expect to make 5 full stacks this year. 5 full stacks would mean 1 Starship and 1 booster 5 times. My expectation has been something along the lines of this. In 2024, or more likely 2026, SpaceX will have achieved all the things they need to do to get to where they can send Starships to Mars, not with people on them. To send uncrewed missions without crew on them, without people on them. We used to call them unmanned, now we call them uncrewed. To send uncrewed missions to Mars. The idea is between now and 2026, let's say, you would start doing test flights of Starship. Get to the point where you're confident you can get Starship into orbit safely. You can get Starship to land on Earth safely. You can get the booster to land safely, and you can get the Starship, which is the second stage, to land safely. After you get that done, then you start launching missions into space and start accomplishing things like launching Starlink payloads into space and building out the Starlink network. But you also do other things like building what Elon has referred to as a propellant depot, so that you're able to fly tanker starships up and load fuel into the propellant depot. And then when the Starship that's going to the moon or to Mars gets up into orbit, it docks with the propellant depot and it loads the fuel, the propellant, and the oxygen that it needs, the liquid methane and liquid oxygen that it needs to be able to get to Mars and probably to come back. Probably the first mission is going to need enough to come back. Well, the uncrewed missions don't need to come back. And then my prediction was that in 2026, SpaceX would send maybe 5 missions to Mars, 5 uncrewed missions, 5 separate starships that would fly to Mars and attempt the first landings of uncrewed missions. And if the ship crashes and blows up, well, no humans were harmed. And the first one, and they're not like flying right next to each other. They're flying maybe a week apart from each other over a 5-week span. And the first one attempts a landing. And if it doesn't stick the landing, if something goes wrong, they've generated a lot of data, and that data is fed back to the other starships and to home. And they rejigger how they're going to do the next landing attempt to try to learn from the first one and do 3 or 5 landing attempts. And hopefully you stick the last, let's say that you missed the first 2, but you learn enough that the last 3 you actually stick the landings. That's a speculation. That's 2026. And the ships that do arrive and do successfully land, they've got solar panels on them. They've got some cargo that's going to be useful for the future. And maybe they've got bots on them, and maybe the bots are able to do meaningful work by 2026. I don't think we're going to have bots ready to do meaningful work on Mars yet, but maybe. Then in 2028, you do a lot more missions. You do 10 or 20 missions to Mars with 10 or 20 starships flying. And if you stick every landing, now you're pretty confident you're going to be able to safely land humans on Mars. And so that's 2028. And the next mission, or maybe 2029, it's 26-month window. So at some point you shift from the even years to the odd years. And then in 2031, you send human missions to Mars along with other uncrewed missions with more cargo, so that when the astronauts arrive, there's a lot of material for them on the Martian surface that they can use to start building whatever they need to build, like building propellant manufacturing so that they're able to actually make propellant they might need to get home. So I was thinking 2031. I thought being conservative, because we're not even doing uncrewed missions in 2024. As things stand now, I don't think we're going to have enough done in 2023 to legitimately expect to do orbital refilling in 2024 and get a launch off to Mars in 2024. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation anymore. But if we have 2023 and 24 and 25, I think that gives you enough time to make 2026 happen for at least one and ideally three or more uncrewed missions. So you get that attempt in and you see what you can learn from them. And having the starships, following each other means it's easier to communicate the data from the one that's landing to the starships that are still flying. And they can relay the information back to Earth. Maybe that's easier than trying to have the starship that's falling through the atmosphere in Mars isn't going to be able to communicate effectively with Earth, but maybe it's possible to get more of that data to the starships. I don't know. I just think that it makes sense to do multiple attempts when you get there. You don't want to just send one and have it fail. You want to take two or three shots and see if you can get one to land. But I think that's a reasonable path to 2031, or maybe it's 2033. 2043 is 10 years later. So I'm just really surprised that Elon took this statement where I thought he had been very optimistic in the past, and I think the SpaceX team in general has been very optimistic in the past. So I don't know what's going on in his head. Was this just a throwaway comment that didn't mean anything? Is he serious? What's going on here? What's the problem? Now, one thing I noticed from back in 2021 that nobody in the SpaceX YouTuber community seemed to mention was Elon was talking about Raptor 2 being better than Raptor 1. Raptor 1 was the initial engine that was used on some of the early Starship test flights. They've upgraded now to Raptor 2, which has, as Elon says, significant improvements in every way. But then he says, but a complete design overhaul is necessary for the engine that can actually make life multiplanetary. It won't be called Raptor. And I was stunned that Tim Dodd and Scott Manley and Marcus House didn't jump on this and start talking about, well, what does Elon mean? What is necessary to make life multiplanetary? What is the next engine technology that he's thinking of? Because when I hear Tim Dodd talking about Raptor, that's like the most advanced engine ever made. So what are the next level advancements that have to happen? And it may be that they're working on this, and I think Raptor 2 is enough to get humans to Mars. Everything I've seen, everything that they're talking about, it seems to me if you can launch payloads into orbit and you're lowering the price of getting things in orbit, the cost of getting a kilogram into orbit, then you're going to be able to do enough to get humans to Mars with what you're doing. It just costs a lot of money. And it may be that some new engine that Elon has in mind is going to take another level of lowering the cost of getting payloads into orbit. When you get lower cost getting payloads into orbit, then all these things become more possible. Nobody, to my knowledge, nobody has asked him about this, or at least he hasn't answered a question about this, explaining what he meant, what's the next engine, what is the design overhaul that's needed. Is there something else in the works? Is there a skunk works in Hawthorne, California, or somewhere or McAllen, Texas, where they're working on some next generation rocket engine? I don't know. And does Elon feel that's necessary before we can get there? And is it taking too long to develop that engine? And that's what's slowing things down? Is it the progress of Starship that we're seeing in Boca Chica that it's just taking too long to get the orbital test launch going? And you sort of start recognizing, okay, if we can't get our orbital test launch done within the time frame that I thought, that pushes it 2 years back. And then you figure we're going to have another problem that's going to push us 2 years back in a little while. And you just keep stacking the problems that are coming. Who knows? So I just found it very frustrating to see that statement and not have follow up and not have somebody say, "Hey, Elon, what do you mean? Don't you?" I mean, I replied, but Elon doesn't reply to everything I say. But to see Tim Dodd or Scott Manley or Marcus House talking about, "Hey, it looks like we're not going to Mars as quickly as we thought." I mean, I've talked to SpaceX employees. I talked to one SpaceX employee in particular who was convinced he was going to Mars, and I don't think he meant 20 years from now. So anyway, I found this to be the most, because Elon is normally so optimistic and he's so aggressive in his timelines. This was the most pessimistic thing I've ever seen Elon say, and Elon is not a pessimistic guy. So to me, this was shocking. What do you think? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Please check out the t-shirts, the Be Less Wrong t-shirt and all the other t-shirts at elonbits.com. Check out the stainless steel water bottles. Also at elonbits.com. Please check out my other videos. Like this video, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.